Advanced Residential Applications and Case Studies. Chapter 8, Cost and Income Approaches. Page 1. Overview. Chapter Learning Objectives. Explain the applicability of the cost and income approaches in appraisal of complex properties. Apply market extraction and indexing to estimate cost new of improvements, and use market extraction to estimate depreciation and total economic life. Apply various methods of estimating land value. End of page. Page 2, Chapter Introduction. When appraising residential properties, we automatically look to the sales comparison approach to guide us to an appropriate value indication. In this chapter, we will explore the possibilities of using the other, that's highlighted, two approaches. Frequently, due to the nature of our subject property, we may not be able to find defensible comparable sales, or we may find some comps, but we don't have a lot of faith in them, and we are looking for additional support from another source. We will investigate the cost approach here and note its strengths and weaknesses. We can always perform a cost approach on any kind of property, and in complex properties, it may be the approach that will yield the best results. We will illustrate some traditional and non-traditional ways to estimate costs. We will also look at how to extract depreciation from the market and investigate some allied applications of that information. Then we will review various methods of site valuation. We will briefly address the applicability of the income approach, specifically gross rent multiplier analysis, or GRM, in appraising complex properties. We will also detail its limitations. End of page. Page 3. Cost approach applicability. By now, you will have received a lot of instruction in the cost approach in introductory level courses. We don't intend to rehash the mechanics of the approach here. You probably have formed your own opinions of its applicability, use, and desirability. If you are typical of residential appraisers, you probably don't think too highly of it, particularly for existing houses. Most likely, your opinion has been formed based on interactions you have had with current or former supervisors or other appraisers. They will tell you it doesn't work real well, particularly in older houses. Lenders usually couldn't care less about having it done. Fannie Mae says on their forms that the cost approach is not required. FHA used to require the cost approach if a property was less than 1 year old. Now, they no longer require it either. Let's forget about requirements now. Instead, let's take a good look at the applicability of the cost approach. The cost approach is most applicable when there are improvements that are fairly new and of standard construction. There is not a lot of unusual depreciation, and the land value is reliably obtainable. The farther away you get from those ideals, the less applicability the cost approach has. That's why the cost approach is not utilized much in appraising older properties. They usually are built of materials that are not typical today and sustain more physical deterioration. They are also more likely to embody functional obsolescence, and because they are located in older neighborhoods, are more susceptible to external obsolescence. Now, let's think about a typical complex property assignment. It may be complex because of unusual physical characteristics such as style, size, or size of land parcel. We just got through stating reasons why the cost approach is not good in those situations. A property also may be complex because of ownership issues. This would also be hard to evaluate through the cost approach because it may create hard to quantify losses in value or depreciation. Way back in chapter 1, we said a property may also be complex because of atypical market conditions, but these would be hard to measure, and it would be difficult to calculate the amount of economic obsolescence that may be occurring at the point in time. All right, 3 strikes and the cost approach is out, right? Well, maybe not. Let's think this through a little more and look at the other 2 approaches as well. On the next page, end of page. Page 4. Applicability of all the approaches. The bottom line is, we have to use something. We have to solve our appraisal problem somehow. Maybe the cost approach has limitations in appraising a complex property, but so do the sales comparison approach and the income approach. The same problems we discussed earlier. You are appraising a geodesic dome on an island encumbered by a life estate in a rapidly changing market. May lead you to conclude that you just don't have any comps at all. Well, If you don't have comps, you can't do a sales comparison approach. If you decide that it is not an income-oriented property and likely would not be purchased by an investor or someone else who would anticipate an income stream, then you shouldn't rely on the income approach. You only have one approach left. You are down to the last tool in your toolbox. The cost approach can be performed on any improved property. You can perform cost approaches on no market properties such as churches, schools, or other special purpose or unique properties where you can't find appropriate comparable sales. You still will have problems estimating the correct amounts for the costs, depreciation, and site value. But you can always perform a cost approach, no matter how complex the property. Your client may not require the cost approach, but the appraisal problem you are facing may require it. It doesn't get any clearer or more basic than Standard 1 of USPAP, which says, in developing a real property appraisal, an appraiser must identify the problem to be solved, determine the scope of work necessary to solve the problem, and correctly complete research and analysis necessary to produce a credible appraisal. You do whatever you have to do to arrive at credible results. Sometimes that means using the cost approach. The more you appraise complex properties, the more you may have to rely on the alternative approaches, the cost and income approaches. We will illustrate how to make them work in non-traditional roles. End of page. Page 5. Reproduction and replacement costs. You already have been exposed to the differences between reproduction and replacement costs. Reproduction cost is defined as the estimated cost to construct at current prices as of the effective date of the appraisal a duplicate or replica of the building being appraised using the same or similar materials, construction standards, design, layout, and quality of workmanship, and embodying all the deficiencies, superadequacies, and obsolescence of the subject building. If you are dealing with an older property with a lot of original materials and workmanship, then the appropriate starting point for the cost approach would be reproduction cost. It will be harder to estimate, but can be done in several ways. You may have to interview builders or do a market extraction of building costs. Replacement cost is defined as the estimated cost to construct at current prices as of a specific date a substitute for a building or other improvements using modern materials and current standards, design and layout. The Marshall and Swift Residential Cost Handbook is a good reference that many of you are accustomed to using. However, you will have to use different parts of the handbook. In the special studies section, there are a series of illustrations of older residences. It may show a picture of a house and say that type of house was common from 1910 to 1920. Then it will refer you to the appropriate cost table. For example, it may say, use average quality 2-story cost table whenever you use a cost manual. The result is replacement cost. In the special studies section there are also cost tables for mountain cabins and cottages and for tropical housing. You will also find a section called Unique Residences. There you will find cost tables for elevated homes, earth-sheltered homes, rammed earth, and baled straw homes. You may also use your Marshall and Swift Residential Cost Handbook to build up customized figures for unusual homes through the use of their segregated cost tables. They are particularly useful if you are costing out a property with various materials added at different times. Perhaps you have a 50-year-old house with a 10-year-old kitchen and 5-year-old metal roof. End of page.